Bom dia, pessoal. Sejam todos bem-vindos. Eu vou dar a palavra aqui para o Vinícius, que vai fazer o briefing de segurança aqui do nosso ambiente, e depois eu volto para conversar com vocês.
Bom dia a todos. Sejam bem-vindos, espero que estejam bem. Meu nome é Vinícius Bastos Lima, sou coordenador de brigada de incêndio aqui do edifício Lubrax. Estou aqui para passar algumas orientações de segurança contra incêndio e pânico. Aqui no auditório principal nós temos 3 saídas de emergência, 2 na parte superior do auditório e uma na parte inferior do auditório, que é o meu lado direito. Em caso de emergência, peço que se mantenham calmos. Peço também que utilizem o corrimão, que é obrigatório o uso do corrimão. É proibido consumir qualquer tipo de alimento dentro do auditório. Bebida, somente água. É proibido sentar na ponta do auditório. E obrigado pela atenção e um ótimo evento.
Bom, senhoras e senhores, bom dia. Sejam todos bem-vindos. Eu sou Alexandre Schermer, sou coordenador de dados e comportamento do Instituto Fundação João Goulart. Queria dar boas-vindas a todos vocês, né? Estamos aqui reunidos para a realização do Seminário NudgeRio, da Behavioral Science, uma iniciativa para disseminar e promover o uso de ciências comportamentais aplicadas na América Latina. A primeira unidade nudge em governo do Brasil está quase completando uma década e continua estimulando o uso de ciência comportamental aplicada, com a missão de aumentar a efetividade das políticas públicas da Prefeitura da cidade do Rio de Janeiro, com incentivos comportamentais que ampliam o benefício do cidadão ao acessar serviços públicos. Os projetos nudge são importantes porque agregam a variável comportamento na elaboração de políticas públicas e geram dados relevantes sobre acesso ao serviço público antes da implantação em larga escala. Assim, avalia-se rapidamente a efetividade em gerar valor para o cidadão, evitando desnecessários e altos custos econômicos. Para isso, a programação de hoje contará com palestrantes renomados de diversos países e de diferentes áreas também, como governos, terceiro setor, iniciativa privada e academia. Esses palestrantes abordarão reflexões, cases e aspectos teóricos sobre os usos e benefícios dos nudges na interação entre governos e seus cidadãos. Para darmos início a este seminário, eu convido a senhora Rafaela Bastos, presidente do Instituto Fundação João Goulart, head e fundadora da NudgeRio, para nos dar as boas-vindas e falar sobre a importância desta iniciativa. Rafaela.
Bom dia a todos, todas, todes. Fundador é muito bom, né? Não se funda, acho que, uma unidade de nudge em governos sem uma parceria entre servidores públicos. Então, já quero aqui homenagear e saudar José Mulan, que foi um gestor na Prefeitura do Rio, que convidou a mim e o Sérgio Bastos para essa empreitada de institucionalizar uma unidade de nudge na Prefeitura do Rio, e o prefeito Eduardo Paes, que em 2014 pessoalmente estimulou o José Mulan a pensar que nudge é uma ferramenta possível em governos. Desde então, a gente tem feito uma série de reflexões, pensando em propostas, possibilidades, mas a NudgeRio especificamente atua bastante com projetos, né? Então, uma das nossas grandes, digamos, lacunas são aspectos mais acadêmicos, digamos assim, né? Não é uma unidade nudge que a gente tenha tantos relatórios expostos nas redes sociais ou nos bancos de projetos, porque a gente é basicamente uma consultoria de projetos e esses relatórios ficam dentro das secretarias. Esse é um perfil que agora, após quase uma década, a gente decidiu mudar estrategicamente, porque a gente entende que a gente tem muito a compartilhar com os interessados no tema. Inclusive, a minha fala e a do Sherman hoje sobre a experiência NudgeRio é pautada já num compartilhamento dessa nossa capacidade de gerar conhecimento. Há uns 2 meses atrás, um mês, eu estive em um evento no México e todo mundo que estava na mesa fez o seguinte comentário, né? Que quando começou a unidade Nudge nos seus setores, tanto iniciativa privada quanto governos, todo mundo começou com um livro Nudge e um abismo do lado, né? Porque o livro Nudge, ele não explica como se faz um experimento. Ele fala dos resultados, nos estimula, mas não explica passo a passo como é um experimento Nudge e os seus desafios. Então, todo mundo se deparou com esse caos que é fazer um experimento, e todo mundo foi produzindo esse saber fazer experimentações. Então, a NudgeRio desenvolveu muitas metodologias internas, muitas técnicas, muita capacidade interna de fazer projetos Nudge e também de desenvolver servidores públicos para que eles sejam capazes não só de fazer conosco projetos Nudge, mas também de identificar problemas em suas secretarias que possam, eventualmente ou objetivamente, ser resolvidos através de um incentivo comportamental. Para mim, o maior valor de um projeto Nudge está no compromisso com o bem-estar do cidadão. Quando a gente pensa que o processo decisório de um cidadão é parte da elaboração de um processo de política pública, é porque a gente está, francamente, em um caminho empático de elaboração de política pública. É porque a gente está, francamente, pensando no cidadão quando a gente quer elaborar o serviço. A gente não está simplesmente avaliando a criação desse serviço a partir da nossa experiência enquanto gestores públicos ou a partir da nossa inteligência. A gente está considerando que esse cidadão tem autonomia, que esse cidadão ele tem limitações e que esse cidadão ele tem capacidades finitas de recursos econômicos, não só financeiros, quando a gente fala de economia, né, mas também de tempo. Então, quando a gente traz as ciências do comportamento para, que eu falo especificamente, para os projetos e políticas públicas, a gente avança e muito na nossa capacidade, enquanto gestores públicos, de fazer políticas públicas orientadas ao bem-estar do cidadão. E aí eu acho que isso é um ganho muito valoroso para a nossa carreira de gestores públicos. Claro que aqui tem pessoas da iniciativa privada, estudantes e simpatizantes. Eu não posso afirmar nesse lugar, mas eu sou uma entusiasta do tema, então acredito que vocês também veem valor com as ciências do comportamento nas demais áreas. A gente também vai ver aqui hoje essas contribuições, mas desse meu lugar aqui de gestora pública, eu fico muito feliz de ver as ciências do comportamento avançando nas áreas de governo. Aproveito também para celebrar que nesse ano de 2023 a gente tem atualmente a 5, que é a unidade de ciências comportamentais do governo federal. A gente tem também a unidade da Receita Federal, com o Ricardo, que acho que eu vi ele aqui hoje, e Ricardo, que também a gente conversou há muitos anos atrás. Então, é sempre um esforço de um servidor público olhando para processos inovadores e inserindo esses processos nas suas instituições, para que a gente consiga melhorar a prestação de serviço público nas dimensões em que eles se aplicam. Então, eu espero que vocês aproveitem o dia de hoje. Queria que a gente tem uma provocação inicial, já na primeira palestra de hoje. Queria deixar aqui essa provocação da gente avançar para além dos nudges. Eu acho que as ciências do comportamento, a economia comportamental, ainda tem muito aspecto teórico que pode colaborar com as áreas do governo, com a iniciativa privada, e eu acredito que a gente pode se desenvolver na prestação de serviços públicos a partir desses aspectos teóricos que estão disponíveis e a gente precisa se desenvolver. Eu, enquanto presidente do Instituto Fundação João Goulart, me coloco disponível para parcerias, para projetos. A gente tem um pouco o cobertor curto, né? A gente não consegue se relacionar com todo mundo que a gente queria, mas a gente, estrategicamente, consegue chegar em alguns lugares. E a importância de eventos como esse, se pela Fundação a gente não consegue fazer, vocês aqui conseguem se conectar com outros pares. Então, aproveitem o Networking Coffee, troquem e-mails, comentem aí, vocês que estão acompanhando a gente no YouTube, comentem se tem algum palestrante que vocês têm interesse de entrar em contato, que a gente também faz essa relação, porque é importante a gente ativar essa rede. O Brasil, a América Latina, já está produzindo muito conhecimento importante e a gente precisa começar a se inspirar e se espelhar nesse conhecimento América Latina. Porque a maioria dos experimentos que a gente acaba considerando tem perspectivas e experiências que não são a nossa realidade. Então, a chance da gente ter um investimento que vai acabar não tendo um resultado aplicável à nossa realidade é grande, né? Tem uma variável ali que é de risco. Então, é importante que a gente comece a se organizar em rede, olhando para o que deu certo, mas também para o que deu errado, porque a gente está produzindo um conhecimento América Latina, Brasil, para que a gente possa realizar experimentos de acordo com a nossa experiência e com as nossas realidades. Muito obrigado. Vou devolver a palavra para o Sherman, nosso coordenador da NudgeRio e de dados de comportamento.
Bom, a Rafaela acabou de falar sobre networking, sobre rede. Então, eu queria destacar aqui as conexões de qualidade que a gente está construindo nesse exato momento e agradecer os parceiros, particularmente a Vibra, né, que nos recebe aqui com tanta hospitalidade. Eu vou citar nominalmente o Eduardo Guilhom, eu sei que ele está aqui em algum lugar, que foi o nosso ponto de contato aí. Ele está há um mês trabalhando comigo nesse evento, então muito obrigado e muito obrigado à Vibra. E agradecer também os parceiros da NudgeRio, que estão transmitindo isso ao vivo no nosso canal do YouTube. Também eu vou nomear a Alessandra Sauberman, que eu sei que está aí coordenando a equipe. Muito obrigado, e muito obrigado a todos da NudgeRio, eles estão lá atrás com a câmera. E dito isso, agora eu queria convidar a todos para assistir um vídeo de boas-vindas do excelentíssimo prefeito da cidade do Rio de Janeiro, o senhor Eduardo Paes. A gente testa 1000 vezes, aí quando entra o público...
Hoje é um dia especial para a nossa cidade. Nós estamos realizando o Seminário NudgeRio, de Behavioral Science, uma agenda internacional dedicada a debater como os incentivos comportamentais, os famosos nudges, podem aprimorar os nossos serviços públicos. A NudgeRio é pioneira desde 2014, quando pessoalmente eu trouxe a ideia de como os nudges podem impactar positivamente nossos projetos e políticas públicas. Ao longo desses quase 10 anos, os líderes cariocas da NudgeRio têm feito a diferença. Juntos, livramos quase 1 milhão de cariocas de ficarem inadimplentes e inscritos em dívida ativa. Fortalecemos o sucesso na transição para a matrícula online, incentivamos o pagamento de cota única do IPTU, antecipando 130 milhões de reais aos cofres públicos. Além disso, a gente melhorou significativamente as políticas de segurança viária para pedestres, criando as travessias mais agradáveis e seguras pela cidade. Esse evento é parte do calendário da experiência Rio Capital do G20. Vai ser uma oportunidade única para a gente aprender e compartilhar como a América Latina tem contribuído para as ciências do comportamento no mundo. Eu agradeço a todos e espero que possamos explorar as inovações que estão sendo apresentadas para aprimorar a qualidade de vida em nossa amada cidade. Muito obrigado.
Bom, então agora nós vamos dar início à nossa primeira apresentação. Nós temos o Michael Halsworth, que é o responsável pelo Behavioral Insight Team América. Ele já está conectado na nossa sala do Zoom, então ele vai entrar ao vivo aqui com a gente de forma remota. Michael, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. Hello. It's wonderful to be talking with you today. I'm Michael Halsworth. I'm the Managing Director of the Behavioral Insights team for the Americas. I am based in New York City right now, but my colleagues in my organization work throughout Latin America, and I wanted to share with you today some of the work we've been doing and also some thoughts on the future of behavioral science. So I'm going to share some slides now with you and talk them through, and I hope the technology works for everybody. So I'm going to start, and if there's a problem, let me know. Okay, so thanks everyone. I say it's wonderful to be here today. I'm going to be talking about what my team does, what behavioral science can do in Latin America with some examples of work that's been done, and then talking about the future of behavioral science as well. So first of all, the Behavioral Insights team, we were originally created back in 2010 in the UK government. People called us the Nudge Unit. That's led to many other kind of teams being created worldwide with a similar purpose. We are now an organization with around 250 employees, but we still have a kind of mission to design services, policies and interventions to improve people's lives using behavioral science. We take behavioral science, we also try and test what we do. Behavior is complex. We don't always know what will happen in particular instances. So we try and, test and say, well, did this work? What difference did this make? And that's a really important kind of discipline. I've colleagues of mine who are based in Mexico, Colombia, and Peru. They run around, more than 40 projects in 14 countries in Latin America. We've worked in many different policy areas, tax collection, health, sustainability, and I'm going to give you some examples. But yeah, we work with mainly the public sector, but also nonprofits and the private sector. And these are my wonderful colleagues. I hope you may be able to meet some of them. So finally, before I give you some examples, what do we do? Well, I mentioned applied behavioral science, taking evidence about human behavior and practically applying that to real world issues. And then, as I mentioned, research and evaluation, trying to find out what works and in what contexts, because the same intervention can have different effects in different countries, in different regions. Running these kind of trials means that there was a study that came out last year that looked at all the work that the BIT had done and concluded that it improved outcomes by around 10% compared to existing practices. And then finally, we, as well as testing things, we also try to look at policy and strategy, things at scale. So working with the structures that exist and saying, how could they be improved? And that's really important. I'll talk about that later, because there's been a tendency to focus on individual sort of projects and tests, and there's much more that can be done for behavioral science in policymaking as a whole, in strategy, in the big decisions about how things are set up. And why are we talking about behavioral science? Well, following on from my point, achieving changes in the world and a better future does require structural and institutional improvements, but these can take time and they require many resources. As I mentioned, behavioral science can say a lot about those changes and what can be done. But at the same time, we also need changes in individuals and in society. And one of the insights from new thinking on complexity, on systems, show that even small changes can build up to have big effects at the system level. And so what we need to do is understand what are the barriers in the way of those behaviors and how can we address them. So the top level, the systems, and the individual level are connected. We need to be looking at both, and behavioral science can help with both. For a start, you can understand what are those barriers to changes. You can create interventions that are evidence-based, that hopefully do things better. You can see what difference they make by testing. And you can also build the capacity of others, provide training and advice on how to apply behavioral science yourself, rather than relying on others. And I do think that a lot of these insights and findings can be used by individuals, by people who don't have specialist training. And indeed, one of the interesting advantages of AI, artificial intelligence, may be that it can open up the findings from behavioral science and help people apply those in their everyday lives. So I've talked enough about the abstract. I would like to now give you some examples of the work that we have done in Latin America. First example is one that talks about understanding those barriers to behavior. This is a project we did a few years ago in Brazil, in Fortaleza. The challenge was, cities may create facilities for waste management, for recycling, but do people use them? Do people know they're there? If they know they're there, do they actually make the effort to go to them and use them properly? How can we understand the barriers? So one thing we do is this exploratory work to understand behavior in context, to talk to the agencies, but also talk to people who use the recycling centres and don't. And the two key barriers we identified were, first, a lack of awareness. People didn't know these centres existed. And second, friction costs, which is even small amounts of effort can mean that people don't do things. So addressing the first barrier, we developed an invitation back with a map showing the nearest location, showing where it is, and also providing a small incentive to allow people to exchange recycling materials for discounts on energy bills. So the idea is you build understanding of what needs to be done. Now that may seem very obvious to you, and quite often we're in situations where people do know what to do and the behavior is not coming along. But sometimes that awareness actually is an important underlying factor that you can address through targeted communications that that tap into how people think about an issue. To address the second issue, reducing the effort, the city government also looked at where people were typically leaving garbage bags and then tried to put the waste disposal facilities in those areas. So going to where people are, looking at the existing behavior and trying to adapt policies to it. And I think that's a really interesting and valuable idea. And they also extended the opening hours of the recycling centres. So this is one where we didn't test the differences. We focused on understanding the barriers and changing the offer to people. So that's one kind of advice and intervention. We can also look at ways of intervening throughout the process and testing the effects. So some work we did in Chile was focused on people engaging with the criminal process around intimate partner violence. So if people file a criminal complaint, a third of them drop out before the case has concluded. So we worked with the United Nations Development Programme in Chile and the Santiago Prosecutor's Office to see if targeted light touch support to victims could reduce the dropout rates. And these were light touch and not particularly expensive support, but they came at 4 points in the process. 1, after filing a complaint, 2, before each hearing, 3, before the trial, and 4, after the trial. And each time it was calls or SMS, text reminders to do things like show people that the system was proceeding, to provide them some kind of support and affirmation. And then we didn't just assume this would work, we tested it. We evaluated the difference providing the support makes. And we know this, that because we did this, because people were randomly assigned to get the support or not in a randomized trial, we know that the support reduced dropouts by about 10 percentage points in the group. And I believe that's around 550 cases a year when scaled up. So again, we've gone through and tried to identify what are some of the issues in a process, make a change, and evaluate it with real-world outcomes. And then a final example, which may be interesting, is around financial inclusion, because we don't just test one thing, we also try to test how different versions of an offer can make a difference. So this is an example of what happened in Mexico. This was a program, this was some work done a few years ago when the conditional cash transfer in Mexico called Prospera was still working, was still in operation. Evidence shows that it was improving outcomes, but many of the recipients weren't taking full advantage of the services that Prospera was offering. So it was a cash transfer program. You got money, but there were other things that could be done. And what our partners at the Ministry of Finance wanted to do was encourage recipients to engage in positive financial behaviors as well, because there was a new system that people could use to use the Yestas stores network, which is kind of grocery stores. People could go in and first make withdrawals because they would save money versus using an ATM. So it was better for their interests to use the Yestas network. But also they could do things like save money and make other other transactions apart from withdrawals. So you could build up more positive financial management as well. But how do you do this? Who do people trust? What are the best messengers or the best touch points to do this? So we tested 2 different ways this could happen. One was through the compulsory Prospera meetings, where people got information about the network through those meetings. And also we targeted store agents in the store network itself. We trained them, we reminded them, and we incentivized them to encourage people to make the transactions at their stores. So the two different ways of doing this, two different touch points, which will be most effective. This is what we don't know beforehand, so that's why we try and test it. And what we found, excuse me, is that the compulsory meetings, the official government official telling you, did have an impact in terms of the proportion of people using these broader services. So that increase you can see in the second column from the left. But the increase was much bigger if it was done through the store, by targeting the store and using them to communicate and encourage people to do this. And we know this also because we actually combined the two as well. On the column on the right, you can see the effect of having meetings and the store, and there was no additional effect. So we know it's the store advocacy that is having the effect on encouraging people to use these services in Mexico. Again, it's the testing, trying to understand pragmatic, real-world changes and what can make a difference. And I think it's worth saying that there's been a lot of success for the field in doing this over the last 15 years. There's been a lot of growth, a lot of investment. Many organizations, as shown by your conference today, are invested and interested and engaging in this approach, which is fantastic because that may not have happened. I think it's because we've tried to show the results that we've got that has happened. But I also think that there are reasons to look to the future. There have been criticisms of applied behavioral science as it's grown up, maybe because it's been successful in some ways. We shouldn't ignore those criticisms. I think we should we can and should find new ways of responding to them, of thinking about the positive vision for behavioral science in the future, of doing more. And that's why I put together this kind of manifesto, which the term manifesto for me, and coming from the UK originally, is like a plan. It's a statement of what we should be doing in the future for the field. And importantly, there are 10 proposals in this manifesto, but it's not just about new tools. It's not just saying, let's keep things the same, but kind of upgrade the things we can, better data science, better AI. There are things we can do better in terms of the methods. You can see that's one of the topics I cover. What techniques can we use that are new, that we've developed? But I also think we should consider the values that we bring to as behavioral scientists, not just what we can do, but how we do it, the principles and ideals we have, the approach that we have, the way we go about things, and also the scope. So are we applying behavioral science to get the most difference, to get the most improvement in the world? And that's about the scope as well. Because one of the criticisms has been that behavioral science has just focused on small changes, on not the big changes. And it's been making tweaks and so on. And I think that there are some changes we can make to address that criticism and many others. And that's why I got these 10 proposals, which I put as these kind of short statements. It's really hard to go through all of them. This is a big kind of piece of work, which took 2 years, and I didn't think about how it would be presented in one go. It's hard to do that. But the reason we put these proposals together is because they make a cohesive whole. They come together and they're coherent. So just talking briefly about the first one, use behavioral science as a lens, that builds on what I just said. I think that the kind of work that I've just showed you, where you identify a problem, you build a solution, and you test it, and you show the results, that has been incredibly powerful. You've seen it can make a difference. It actually came about, I think, originally because when, in the early days of current applied behavioral science, the teams like the Behavioral Insights team wanted to show what difference we were making. There was some skepticism Are you making a difference? Can you actually improve anything? So to respond, we focus on testing things. We focus on saying, we're going to change one specific element, and we're going to be really sure that it has this impact. That story of here's what it was like before, here's what we changed, and here were the results. That is a very powerful way of talking. And I just gave these examples to you today. It's easy to talk about. But I think also over time, what it does is it makes people think that's just what behavioral scientists do. They focus on a particular area and they change it. They change an element of the design of a system or feature, like downstream, if you like. And that can lead you to say, well, okay, when we've got that kind of problem, when we've got like a behavioral problem, let's bring the behavioral scientists in. And I don't think that's right. Behavioral science can do much more. It can inform the overall structure of how you set up your tax, for example, how you create your legislation, how you regulate organizations. It's not an alternative. It's not a thing you change when you've made the big decisions. And that's why I want to talk about behavioral science as a lens, because sometimes people talk as if behavioral science is a tool that you pick up in particular moments. You say, oh, this is a behavioral problem, let's pick up behavioral science. Actually, I think behavioral science is the way you understand the different tools, the way you understand the choices. It allows you to step back and see the problem and say, well, maybe we should be thinking about taxation here, but let's structure the taxation, for example, so that it has the best effects based on human behavior, based on what we know. I think that's the true promise of behavioral science. And to do that, I think we need to change the way we talk about it, the metaphors, from this idea of a tool that fixes specific problems to a lens through which we see problems and say, well, maybe we don't need to change behavior. Maybe we need to change how we're thinking about the problem, like with the ecopontes in Fortaleza, moving the resources to where people are already going, to the behavior that's already existing, rather than trying to change that behavior to our plan. Now, I think that way of thinking offers a lot more opportunities. And I think we need to start changing the way we talk about behavioral science to get to that point. So I think the current process we have, very powerful, very effective, but also can limit us in what we do. And the other proposals build on this in different ways of how we can extend behavioral science, like see the system as around complex adaptive systems and behavioral science. How can you bring them together to achieve wider scale change through targeted individual changes, for example? Predict and just is about the idea that we shouldn't just be, say, running experiments, but beforehand we should be predicting what we think will happen and then getting the results back when we have them and finding out that actually our predictions were wrong. Maybe we need to adjust our preconceptions about a problem. And I think if we don't do predictions, we just run experiments, we kind of forget that we thought differently beforehand. We think, oh yeah, that's what I expected to happen. And maybe it wasn't. A prediction and then getting the results back allows you to realize what you thought at the time. So there are all these kind of changes that I think are really important. Some of them around the reliability of the evidence space and how we think about it. Some about being humble in terms of, I think, for example, behavioral scientists doing work in the real world shouldn't be talking about irrationality. Because I think if you do that, the risk is you jump to a conclusion about biases that may not be true. People may have reasons for what they're doing that you haven't uncovered yet. So rather than assuming people are being irrational, exploring the context and understanding why people may be doing things, I think is a much more appropriate and valuable way forward. So again, my time with you today is limited. I could talk for a lot longer about these different things, but I think my overall message is that a lot has been done in behavioral science. A lot has been done in Latin America with behavioral science. There are many opportunities to do much more. I think those opportunities will only be bigger if we can think about some of these ideas about how to develop the field of behavioral science further. Each of the proposals I've set out try to address a criticism that's come out from behavioral science, and also there are different actors who may be responsible for addressing them. So I encourage you to look more about the report, which I can't talk to too much today. And also please do get in touch with me via email with any questions you may have. The agenda for today looks fantastic. I'm sorry I couldn't be there this time with you in person, but I hope to be at some point in the future. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to check with the audience here if they have any questions for you, okay? Just a second. Pessoal, vocês têm alguma pergunta para fazer para o Michael? Pode fazer em português, eu traduzo, ou se quiser fazer direto em inglês, vocês fiquem à vontade. Enquanto isso, o pessoal que está lá comandando a sala do Zoom, vê se tem alguma pergunta do pessoal que está acompanhando online. Alguém? Dou-lhe uma. He's asking why it was made here in Brazil. They did the recycling incentives here in Brazil without the financial incentives that they were doing in Mexico as well. Do you know that? And by the way, I would like personally to thank you for bringing us the Latin American examples. I mean, it took you some time to do this research. I know that, so thank you very much. So the difference between what they did in Fortaleza with the recycling and what they did in Mexico with the incentive, the financial incentives.
Well, thank you. There are many other examples from the work that the team has done in Latin America, and it's been a really great partnership with many of the governments there. So I wish I could. I have other examples. These were different projects. They were done at different times in different contexts. One was done at a national scale, one was done at a city scale. There were different resources available. So those are some of the reasons that they were different between the two. One important thing is to really understand the context and what is possible in each context. Sometimes there is the financial program or incentive available, and sometimes there isn't. I think there are similarities between the two in the sense that both times you were trying to understand what would be easiest for people, trying to understand how people are using an existing service. So I think there are similarities, but they're different projects in different contexts. I hope I understood and answered your question properly.
Thank you. Mais alguém? Peraí que a gente vai levar o microfone para você. Marcelo, você pode levar o microfone ali. Levanta a mão para Marcela te ver. Obrigado. We have one more here.
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So it's more like a basic question. I'm getting to know these concepts right now. And how would you define a nudge? For example, we may apply nudges in our daily work practices, but which definition or points would you say a nudge should cover? Like biases or things you were saying, like how can I define this is a nudge point of view or practice I'm applying, or just maybe something else inspired by a comportment or something like that, but How would you say those defining points a nudge should cover? So I can say, okay, I'm applying nudges in my work or practices or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So first thing, maybe, do you need to? Because nudges are one aspect of applied behavioral science. They are deliberately created to have limits on them. They're kind of created to be I know in some ways a political compromise. Is what Thaler and Sunstein would say. So maybe the distinction sometimes isn't so important, like to say, is this a nudge or not? When it is important, it's worth remembering that the definition of a nudge, as set out in the book, is quite vague. It's a little bit fuzzy or unclear, but I would say that the key aspects are that choices have been designed to make one option more likely to be chosen based on what we know about human behavior. And that design cannot limit options. It cannot substantially change people's incentives. So you can't coerce people to choose it. You can't, pay them to choose it. So there are deliberate limits on what a nudge is. So, for example, a tax can't be a nudge unless it's a very small kind of fee. But even then, it's debatable. And a law can't be a nudge based on the original definition. But I think that the term has been used in so many different ways and was quite unclearly defined to start with, that I wouldn't. It's a difficult one because, in one sense, I wouldn't worry too much because already, it's been used in an unclear way. But if you, I would use more like the language of applied behavioral science. But if you are asked, I would say it's designing a choice set so that we're more likely to choose one option or another based on human behavior without restricting options or changing incentives.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and it's coming from the Zoom conference room.
Hi, Michael. Thank you for your presentation and congrats for your work. Great, Ben. My question is regarding the more systemic interventions that you mentioned. So how would you imagine a way of implementing those? So I know the theoretical applications that we can go for regulation or redesign, for example, the financial systems, as you mentioned, but how would we implement that? Is bring the debate to legislative arenas, or do you envision any other kind of applications? And are they compatible with the currently structure of behavioral units, or would we have to develop other kinds of societal interchange?
Yeah, great question. I think this is really hard because what you're asking here is how do you improve the way that policymaking or government works? And that's a very big question. And I've spent a lot of time trying to think about it. The first thing is that you need to incorporate rather than ignore politics, because what often doesn't work is if a technocratic person comes along with a technical solution, but can't bridge the understanding of what people are trying to achieve politically. And I think politics is important because it's the way we make decisions. In a democracy, you need politics, and for that reason, I think it's really important to have someone who is personally persuasive, who understands the technical but can speak to people who are dealing with the political, who are dealing with priorities day to day, and just often trying to do their best to reconcile them. So, and we were lucky in the early days of having David Halpin, who was somebody who could do this. You could speak to people who are trying to make decisions quickly, but communicate the essence of the ideas accurately. Because I see this as integrating into existing processes rather than trying to put something in parallel. It may even be something as small as considering defaults when you're legislating. I would consider that to be a win because in the past that has not happened. So if we can make smaller kind of changes based on personalities, based on recognizing the importance of the political, I think that's the way forward rather than me giving you a clever answer that neglects the realities of how things get done in government, because I think those realities are the ones we have to work with and live with.
So, thank you, Michael. Unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions. A gente não tem mais tempo para perguntas, a gente tem que seguir a programação. I would like to thank you once again. I know you're 2 hours behind us, so you have to wake up really early today to accommodate us. So, that's a special thanks for you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye then.
So, bye.
Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you. Então, dando prosseguimento aqui à nossa programação, nós já estamos com a mesa virtual composta aqui, né? Eu estou vendo o pessoal